That was so kind. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I feel like I know half the room, so this is like a nice reunion of sorts. Excuse me. I haven't seen so many of you in person in so long, so I'm probably going to randomly smile a lot when I look in the audience and catch your eyes. Please don't think I'm being randomly weird. I got a short amount of time. I got a lot to tell you. You know, the goal was to give you some tools, and I said, I love you all, but you can't get tools in 35 minutes. But what I can do is I can introduce you to my company first. Humanature, our goal is to support leaders and organizations in centering humanity in the context of their work. Everything else gets centered, and as a trustee, we tend to get centered. Oh, I'm already starting trouble. We tend to get centered, right, as funders, but companies fight a lot to try to figure out how do you balance the people, both internal to their organization and external to the organization, the typical beneficiary, if you will. They've got to balance that and balance us, plus time constraints and a number of other things. And so this company did not come from me being a trustee, but as I've become a trustee and board member in philanthropic spaces, the mission of the company like plagues me at night. So welcome to my plague. Welcome to my life and journey. Today's goal, here's the other thing I can do for you. I can't give you tools in 35 minutes, but what I can do is give you some language and some frameworks that'll support your teams in widening their lens of human concern. Human is one of my favorite words. It's also one of the most difficult words, I think, for us to functionally define, to operationally define, but it's the thing that's demanded of you very early in life. Anyone got kids? Yep, about, what, 6 months in, you're like, just talk, right? That's a demand on humanity before it's biologically, or before they're biologically even capable of doing the thing you want. But this is what we're gonna do today. Here's my quick bio. Thank you for that. Was such a kind bio. I was really moved. I mean, the introduction. I was really moved by that. Thank you so much. But here's a quick bio. The stuff in orange is the thing, or the things to me that ground me in my life. Right. I'm an artist first and foremost. I'm a creative. I love that creative has become a noun. Like I'm all about that. So I'm an artist and creative. Have been for a long time. I don't know if that's I was gonna say, I don't know if that's a good thing. No, I'm just kidding. It's a good thing. I just paid a lot of money to get a piece of paper that says I can make music. And so sometimes I just wonder, did I make the right choice? But I met some of the most amazing human beings in that experience, and I learned something that college is about network more than it's about education, right? That is what I learned from that degree. So as much as I disparage it a little bit, I give it some love back. But I am an artist and creative, and the reason I bring that up first and foremost is that it's connected to the fact that I'm insatiably curious, and it's what moves me, it's what pushes me, it's how I learn to see the world. I learned to see the world in a way that allowed me to practice curiosity regularly. So much so that I had to learn how to translate that curiosity so that people didn't get offended by how many questions I could ask in 35 seconds. It's like, Michael, slow down. I'm like, okay, my bad. The goal is not to offend you, but it really comes from a place of honest curiosity. So curious. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a moment. I am a bit of an educator. I teach in UPenn in the city planning department. I teach a class called Social Impact in Practice. It's a fascinating class of discourse. And it's a space I get to also push for this idea of how do you practice curiosity as an operational thing. So I'll purposely put articles in there to make my students get mad and ask me questions. It's a great journey when they figure that out. I'm also at Curtis in Career Studies. I am at the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation and working with the Philadelphia Equity Alliance on a human capital transformation project for the region. I do need to shout out a gentleman in the room named Austin Planer. So many of you see me and you're like, Michael runs around with a laptop 24/7. Like, what and how is he doing all this? There are a good 10 to 12 people around me who like to be in the shadows. I'm pushing them forward more and more. I won't ask him to stand up and wave, but do know that there's a gentleman in this room named Austin who is undergirding so much of our ability to be in multiple spaces at the same time. This piece here about being a board member is where I want to talk to you from. All that other stuff informs me because I was doing all of that before I became a board member in any of these four places. The Samuel S. Fells Fund has been one of the most nurturing places I've ever been a part of. If you had told me 5 years ago that there's a place in philanthropy on a board, particularly serving on an investment committee for 4 years, that would be nurturing, I would have laughed. This is my favorite side. Keep up. No, I'm just kidding. Totally kidding. But no, I really would have laughed. And I would have said, I don't even know that that's possible. But what I will root my love for the Fells Fund in is the practice of curiosity. I don't think there's a single question that is ever barred from a table that has so many different opinions and people around it. And the commitment to sit with one another and listen and ask questions that complicate my story and my opinion of a thing versus specifically asking questions to try to complicate someone else's story and opinion for the purposes of achieving an end, that actually doesn't happen there. I experience that latter thing all the time in other places. None of them up here. So, we're going to talk today a bit about the power of narrative inquiry and storytelling and the difference between the two and their relationship with one another. And what I want to submit to you is that and this is from the positionality again of being on the board of 3 different philanthropic institutions, communications, storytelling, and narrative work all get kind of shoved together. And it's typically, well, what story are we telling about our impact? What story are we telling about the work of our grantees to other people? What do we want to lift up and how? And what I want to submit to you today is that anyone that knows me well knows I love science. I wish we could geek out for 2 hours on the science behind bias and et cetera. So I'm going to talk in bigger chunks around the science, but I'll be hanging around a while and happy to talk with anyone about this. What I want to submit to you is that there is no way to get to equity. There's no way to really address the mechanism that is the bias, well, what I call the bias mechanism, because the bias is not a specific part of your brain or body that does a thing. It's a cascading of a number of things happening at the biological and psychological and social level that then are producing outputs and outcomes. Those are the biased things, the outputs and the outcomes. The mechanism and the process, that's what we got to dig into a bit more. And it's interesting because we have tools in storytelling and in narrative inquiry and communications that if we turn them inward, scientifically, and in terms of organizational behavior, would start to break up and cut up the mechanism in a healthy way to reduce the outputs and outcomes that are biased. So that's what we're going to try to figure out today, but it goes back to this goal. You got to have some language and frameworks with which to do the inquiry and to organize the story and to take the journey, or it won't work. And so that journey is one between the spot of safety and bravery. I don't know that I actually took a real drink of water, excuse me. I looked at it a bunch. The journey is somewhere between safety and bravery. Safety, we're going to pick up for a moment here. I'm going to move really fast. Safety is not a constant. It is actually a privilege of many kinds to assume you are safe in any given moment. I'm a cisgender male. That means I agree with the assignment of my sex at birth. And I live my life that way. And I didn't realize that women, so cis women, non-cis women, trans folks, non-binary folks, I had no idea that they had so many tactics to keep themselves safe on a street, not a one, keys between the fingers. I said, huh? I just bounce around the street like, I mean, it's Philly, it's a little wild, so anything can happen. But generically, I mean, I walk home at 12 o'clock at night through Center City, and I really am more wondering like, well, where am I gonna get water because everything's closed because of COVID and I'm thirsty and all the Wawas have left, right? Like that's where my mind is at. It is actually not on how many tactics and quick pieces of access to a tool to help keep me safe do I need in this moment. I don't experience the city that way. I am in the same city as many of you, and we don't experience it the same way. I want to submit to you that boardrooms work the same way. I want to submit to you that project review teams work the same way. We can all be in the same physical space, and not experience the same sense of place. Place is what happens to a space when it's activated by meaning, by activity, by the relationships housed in said space, the processes and systems that have been designed and then implemented in that place. So we can be in the same physical space and we're not experiencing the same sense of place. It's fundamental to our humanity. This is why 2 or 3 siblings can grow up in the same household and end up so dramatically different. We have beliefs about our humanity that are operationally not real, but they've taken up too much space. And so what I want to submit to you today is that we're going to have to use narrative inquiry and storytelling to break that up and help us in a healthy way complicate how we understand and see the world, and thereby maybe reimagine what our tools are and how they can be utilized. But this spot between safety and bravery, one, safety is not ubiquitous, so it already, to me, has to start with some practice of curiosity to try to figure out in any group or anything outside of myself, what am I even talking about? And what do we operationally mean when we use words like safety or safe space? The second is that bravery is really the task because safety requires a prerequisite of trust. So if I don't trust that you, a system, or a thing has ever had my well-being or posterity in mind, why would I automatically show up and think I'm safe? Even if I'm smiling. The level of performance that Christine pointed out in the intersectional conversation, the level of performance that people can literally take on as habit is so real, and we don't really give enough space to that conversation when it comes to our operations, what we do and how we do it. So being brave means opening up to that conversation. Being brave might mean listening more. It might mean actually not having responses sometime and just sitting in and actively listening to what's happening. It might mean asking new questions on purpose. It might mean extending the meeting. It might mean adding a meeting. Sometimes bravery is a lot simpler than we think. And sometimes it's a lot more complex. But that journey in between is what we've got to really figure out. So I challenge you today, what's your story? Brene Brown didn't come up with this. This is cognitive behavioral therapy kind of 101. But I love that she's popularized this. What story are you telling yourself about the experience that you're having right now? And then what I want you to press into is, well, then what's our story? What story are we telling ourselves about a sector, about the state of Philadelphia and its future right now? What story are we telling ourselves and accepting about the history of this city from a policy perspective? I'm a nerd, so from an epistemic perspective. These are questions that we have to, what is the story that we're choosing to invest in and believe in? Because it's not just fodder on the side biologically or psychologically. It is actually shaping and governing how your imagination works. This is why this is the most important question to me of the 21st century. And it's the one we are probably, in terms of popular science, and in terms of the way we think in popular space, the one we're least qualified at large to answer. So many of us start this conversation as, well, what makes us human and that over there not human? So we actually many people start defining a negation. Any workshop I've done, many of you have actually seen this slide because you work with me. Thank you for keeping me in your life. Many of you have seen this slide. And as you know, it's my favorite question because I just keep learning more. But you also know the flip side of this is that this is such an emergent space for us over the last 20 years. We are literally destroying, in a healthy way, the mythos of our humanity. But what we've not done is cross any of that over the policy. Policy is so developmentally inappropriate across so many spaces of the lifespan. Absolutely developmentally inappropriate. Many of you have also done an exercise with me where we have grown a crop together. So for the sake of time, I can't do this with you, but I'm gonna walk you through the exercise. We would start with, hey guys, we're all going out to Reading to a farm, and you're gonna help plant a crop. We're gonna plant tomatoes. Let's just pick a random crop. And you're gonna leave me in charge because you're gonna leave and go back to Philly, but you're gonna leave me and a crew in charge of this crop. What do we need to grow a healthy crop? People start throwing out things like sunlight, water, yada, yada, tools, people, knowledge, patience, time. So what you end up with is a mix of four things, tangible and intangible things, dancing in some kind of rhythm with human-made and naturally occurring things. Tangible, intangible, human-made, naturally occurring, all colliding with each other in their own rhythm of development to produce a healthy crop over time. Now, you leave me alone with my team, you go away, you come back, you're driving up, it's harvest time, you're about to pick the plumpest tomatoes you've ever had, you're super excited for the stew and the spaghetti sauce, you're really excited, you drive up, you're looking at things that look like shriveled up beets. What's the first thing that crosses your mind? Anybody, really quickly. First thing that crosses your mind. Where's that person that was working for me? Go for it. Where's Mike, right? So people come up with a laundry list of things. What did I do wrong? What did I not think about? What did I da-da-da-da? Who do I need to talk to? This. The next question I ask is, what would you do to ascertain what went wrong? Oh, we'll soil samples, interview the farmers, interview the staff, surveillance equipment. I've been doing this for 8 years. I've heard all kinds of stuff now. The surveillance went through me, but it's okay, I get it. The last question I ask people is, how many of you would blame the tomato for its resulting state of being? Right, that's my favorite part is when people laugh, so thank you. It's ridiculous. You would never go to vegetative life and go, ha, tomato, how dare you? For whatever reason, when we swapped the tomato out with a human being, did the parents work hard enough? Did they want it hard enough? Education's free. We all can get it. Well, resilience, resilience, resilience. Developmentally inappropriate. Framing and policy, top to bottom. Top to bottom. We are socialized to be more inquisitive about vegetative life than we are about the developmental trajectory of young people, of their families. Intangible and tangible things colliding with human-made and naturally occurring things. Poverty is not naturally occurring. Let's be clear about what category that falls in. But I think, unfortunately, from a very anthropological nature and place, we've taken that in, and that's become a thing for us. It's almost like oh, well, poverty is just there. Tangible, intangible, human-made, naturally occurring. We're talking about development. We can do something with it later, but we at least, from an epistemic place, have to put things in the right category. How do I help people cross into a space of understanding what does it mean to operationalize this humanity thing, and what does it mean then to do something with that? We're all systems people. We love our money. We want our money as trustees to do something that's impactful. What I submit to people is it's hard to do something good for humans if you don't know what they are. And it's hard to do something good for humans if we don't even understand what makes them all safe. Yikes, I feel like I'm getting in a lot of trouble. Beat me up later, friends. I hope you'll come with me for this next piece. Here we go. Health sciences model human development. There are 4 categories of human development. They are co-occurring, means they happen at the same time. And they're dynamic, that means they influence one another. I want to call your attention to the dimension that developmentalists call spiritual. They added that term on, roughly I can find in paperwork, somewhere between 2012 and 2014 that started happening. But it's because of the dimensions of the human being to create and make meaning out of any and everything. It's just what we do. This is where bias has an interesting seat in development, but it's also where storytelling and narrative have an interesting seat in development. So again, I'm challenging you to think through what's your story, what's the story we're telling ourselves about the region as it relates to the human development index and potential of anyone and anything we think of as needing philanthropic capital or investment capital for that matter. What questions are we asking? What questions could we be asking about our beliefs on what it means to understand an equitable investment? in humanity. If you need a system, I submit this as a starting place for you to ask new questions about what it means to invest with these kinds of frames. I invite you to think about what it means to think about outcomes and outputs in these kinds of frames. There should be a thing that happens in your mind. You should say, I'm not that sure. Because this is where the curiosity piece comes in. So I want to submit to you something else. There is a major I'm an artist. I deal with communication, stories, and narratives all the time. This is another area people botch. A story is not a narrative. I rarely read slides at people. I'm gonna read these. Narrative, in contrast to story, is a way of looking at the world. It is an overarching idea or concept that influences thought, meaning, and decision-making. It is a symbolic frame like the American dream or the welfare queen. It doesn't necessarily have a clear beginning, middle, or end like a story. Stories are episodic. Narratives are not. The welfare queen has been so well branded, and this is a moment I laughed, but it was so bad. When Barack Obama was called the food stamp president, I laughed out of my chair and said, that is brilliant. It's nasty, mean, and messy. But from a comms perspective, I said, whoever's in that room, that's a genius in branding. Somebody popped that out real quick and was like, that's the move. That's the one, right? You don't even need to understand the stories that back that up, because the narrative has already been so well built and so well constructed and socialized that one term, that person got a lot of money, unfortunately, I'm sure, because that's how that world works. So here's the deal, the image I want you to take away. If stories are each like a pearl, then narrative is the string of pearls. It connects the dots at the big picture level. There's not one story that backs up the American dream. There are a ton. And if we disaggregate those stories and start to organize them about race, you start to get icons. The American dream, Oprah, Obama, we can start going down a list. Model minority myths, the model women at work. These things are prevalent, they're huge, we don't challenge them much. So a very simple question that I use in workshops that some of you have been in is, how did you come to learn about professionalism? At what age did you learn what professional meant? Can you tell me a story about that? Because it's never in your 30s. It's at a very impressionable stage in age and development. And we carry that with us and then cast those narrative nets over lots and lots and lots of other people. Again, a good narrative will use a range of stories to illustrate, animate, and validate its message. Narrative gives meaning to a broader vision, a view of what's possible, and why we should head in that direction. I want to submit to you that narratives exist across all these dimensions of our humanity. So you saw the mechanics of our humanity from a developmental perspective, the biological, the psychological, the social, and the dimension of meaning making. But humans are social organisms, so we don't just have those 4 dimensions happening in little pods. They're happening within systems that are in systems that are in other systems. So there's a socio-ecological theory or nested systems theory for those that want to know. But you are a person inside of a home and family, inside of a neighborhood or community. Communities are now digital too, so it's gotten really complicated. We can now get into really closed spaces of echo chambers. False narratives can spread like wildfire. And what I want to submit to you is that there's a potential that Philadelphia has sat in that kind of thing for a very long time, before many of us were even in these roles. Trigger warning. I'm going to share with you the dominant narrative that has driven this country. It is a very uncomfortable piece of this conversation. It is a very uncomfortable moment. The trigger warning here is that there's a book written by a legal scholar from Yale named James Q. Whitman, and it's called Hitler's American Model. There's a swastika on the cover, so I'm giving you this trigger warning. Please close your eyes. You can leave the room for a moment. Do whatever you need to do to protect yourself, but this is I think we have to talk about this. James Q. Whitman is a brilliant scholar who looks at foreign and international policy and law. He wrote this book, published it in 2017. He wrote it pre-Trump. And as he saw the rise of neo-Nazism in the country becoming more main stage, he actually pushed the book back a moment to go redo the introduction because he was terrified at what he saw. This is easily one of the most amazing and terrifying books I have ever consumed. But I consumed it because I was also studying eugenics. And I'm going to point out something to you here. What's clear from this man's research and documentation of history, the narrative we have about World War II and our good Americanness and yada, 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 Nazi race law is highly informed and influenced by American race law, pre-Jim Crow, through Jim Crow. In some cases, you had the originators of Nazi race law making comments like, well, that thing they did over there is actually a little too mean. We're not going to do that. We got to sit with that. That's not the story we hear. Those are not the things that we're told. And the reason I bring this up in relationship to the picture of this gentleman on the left, the right, your right, yes. Lewis Terman in the middle there is the father of the modern IQ test. He took the the Binet IQ test from France. He worked at Stanford, updated it. It became known as the Stanford Binet IQ test. And he purposed it to be in service of eugenics. IQ testing from this iteration out was purposed to figure out who should be sterilized and who, in his own words, is destined to be the bearers of wood and the drawers of water. Eugenics was not a private, small thing happening on the side. It took till 1965 for the Annals of Human Genetics to actually adopt that name. It was the Annals of Eugenics before that. This is uncomfortable for us, but we have to talk about it or there's no real equity. I am trying to get you to understand that there is nowhere that you have been socialized to the humanity of people that are not like you, and that goes beyond race. That's not the world we live in. That's not the America we live in. And as much as I love this city, been here for 20 years, that's just not the Philly we live in. It doesn't mean we don't have the potential to do something different, but we gotta be honest about our start. The other thing that Lewis Terman did was birth the gifted movement. His life is fascinating. At the same time he's birthing the eugenics movement and the use of this test, he's birthing the gifted child movement, which I actually benefited from. Learning this has been the strangest part of my life. There's a question? Yes, he did. And we now have graduation requirements still using standardized tests with which a third of the students can actually graduate that way. The mechanics are here. They're not far. They're not distant. Keystone exams, our youth in the graduating position now a third can only pass at proficient or higher an algebra, literature, or biology test. They won't graduate without that. I mean, they've got some other pathways now we're developing. I'm running short on time. We're getting to the end. Here's what I want to submit to you with all of that. We have got to practice inquiry in ways that could be actually so fun, so engaging, and so human. The history sucks. Right now is uncomfortable. But the moment we choose to be in next and the future we chart ourselves towards could be absolutely exciting and great. I want to submit to you that your imagination works in one of two ways, generically. This work comes from a woman named Eleanor Mitt. She studied the imagination or the imaginative faculties in many, many situations and settings. And she's come to this conclusion. It looks like, predominantly, for anything that is distant from you physically, psychologically, or socially, you will imagine that thing, idea, or concept with words. For things that are close to you, physically, psychologically, or socially, you will actually imagine more with pictures. It seems so simple at the top, and the moment you start to unpack that, it gets really funky. Pictures from a neuroaesthetic sense, this is why art's fascinating. Pictures bypass certain parts of your thinking, your cognition, cogitation. It'll bypass that space, moves really fast, and it actually hits on an emotional center before you even think you have a choice to be emotional. That's why movies hit you so fast. Picture and sound, just hitting these spots that are not necessarily the most cognitive, though they're involved with that same part of your brain. The emotions and thinking share a lot of circuitry, though it's not all the same. It gets funky because this is where, if you can think that your threat or harm is close to you, you might imagine some really bad scenarios with lots of pictures. So even though gun violence is very, very restricted to certain neighborhoods and places, we get the random pop-ups here and there. The threat is close psychologically, and so you can imagine all kinds of pictures. The challenge we have is there a world where we can imagine those same groups of people doing all kinds of other things that typically get put into words and grant applications, and I wonder how much of that lands for us. Can we see a 17-year-old black boy with tattoos on his face as actually having an answer for the world in a legitimate way? I would submit to you that because of test scores, the anthropological nature of poverty, et cetera, that this makes it so that it's so distant from us, that boy can't do that. He is psychologically and socially distant from that. You can't even see a picture of it. The question becomes, how in relationship can we use the power of storytelling and narrative inquiry with one another, practice curiosity, build relationships with folk to make that picture a little more real for us and for them? Because this is a self-circuitous, defeating prophecy. People don't believe they can do it. We don't believe they can do it. And so it's psychological and social distance pushes us further and further from it, and we're spending lots of money. So in closing, my request of us is to consider, what stories am I telling myself about fill in the blank? Whose stories are always centralized? Who always gets to frame the problem? Who gets to frame the narrative? What narratives are we functioning out of? Have we actually, as a group and team, invested in figuring out what narratives are guiding us? When I do work with companies, we spend sometimes a month digging into what the narratives are that might be guiding and leading this team. It is a fascinating process. So that's what I want to submit to you, that at the end of the day, we do not have a history of being honest about our beginnings. We don't have a history of being honest about the last 50 years. And we've got some mechanics that are in our way if we're not intentional with breaking them up. Ask questions that healthily complicate your story. That's my request of you. Thank you so much for this moment to bleed out my heart.